Part 1. Had worked in fear for 300 years. As a senior executive at the Galactic Broadcast Consortium, it was his job to find content that scared people. Not just any people, but the billions of beings across 47 star systems who paid good money to feel afraid. Fear was entertainment. It had been this way for thousands of years across the galaxy. Every intelligent species enjoyed being scared in safe ways. It was a universal truth, like gravity or the speed of light. Beings liked to feel their hearts race and their minds panic, as long as they knew they were actually safe. Was very good at his job. His iridescent scales shifted from blue to green as he walked through the halls of the consortium headquarters on Prime. His 12 sensory tendrils floated behind him, picking up the emotional states of everyone he passed. Junior employees felt nervous around him. Senior staff felt respect. Everyone felt a little afraid. This pleased him. Fear was his business after all. But lately, business had been bad. Not financially. The consortium still made enormous profits. The problem was creative. After centuries of horror content from hundreds of species, audiences were getting bored. They still produced their famous slow-burn thermal anxiety pieces, where characters gradually overheated until their minds broke. The created shell dissolution nightmares that terrified their own kind. The Vex made excellent predator chase content. All of it was good, none of it was new. Entered his office and looked out at the purple sky of his. 3 moons hung low on the horizon. He had seen this view thousands of times. Like the horror content he curated, it no longer moved him. His assistant, a young named, knocked on the doorframe. "Sir, the analytics team found something unusual." Define unusual. A signal from an uncharted system, primitive broadcast technology, but the content paused, his scales flickering with uncertainty. "The content is strange, sir. They think you should see it." Felt a small spark of interest. It had been decades since anything surprised him. "Send it to my viewer." He sat down as the holographic display activated. The first thing he noticed was how primitive the recording was. 2-dimensional images, crude audio, simple visual effects. Whatever species had made this clearly had not yet developed proper entertainment technology. Then the content began, and stopped thinking about technology. The story showed a human family arriving at an isolated structure called a hotel. The male parent had been hired to maintain the building during its empty season. From the beginning, something felt wrong. The hotel was too big, too empty, too quiet. The human child saw things that were not there. The male parent began to change. Watched as the story built its fear slowly, carefully, like a master architect constructing a temple. The horror came from multiple directions at once. There was supernatural threat. The building itself seemed alive with malevolent energy. There was psychological terror. The male parent's mind crumbled piece by piece. There was domestic tragedy. A family destroyed itself from within. There was isolation. No one could help them. No one could hear them scream. When the film ended, realized his tendrils had gone completely rigid. 2 of his 3 hearts had stopped beating temporarily. He had not blinked in 47 minutes. He immediately called back. "Where did this come from?" "A planet called Earth, sir. 3rd planet from a yellow star in an unremarkable spiral arm. The species calls themselves humans." "What do we know about them?" Checked his. "Almost nothing, sir. They have not achieved interstellar travel. They are a young species, barely 10,000 years into their civilized period. They have fought 2 global wars in the last century and nearly destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons." They nearly destroyed themselves. "Yes, sir. They developed weapons capable of ending their species before they developed the wisdom to avoid using them. It seems to be a pattern with them." Considered this. A species that had stared at its own extinction and survived. A species that had invented new ways to die before inventing ways to live longer. What kind of minds did such creatures have? "Is there more content?" "Much more, sir. Their planet broadcasts constantly, thousands of stories, many of them are horror content. Show me everything. Over the next several days, did nothing but consume human horror. He watched films about dead creatures that rose and ate the living, stories about humans whose bodies transformed into monsters, tales of beings from other dimensions that drove people insane simply by being observed, narratives about ordinary locations, houses, hospitals, hotels, that became places of nightmare. What struck him most was the variety. Human fear was not one thing. It was hundreds of things, thousands. They had fears about their bodies, fears about their minds, fears about society, fears about isolation. They feared the unknown and the known. They feared strangers and loved ones. They feared change and stagnation. They feared death, and somehow they also feared living forever. Each fear had a name. Each fear had stories built around it. These humans had their terrors with the precision of scientists and the passion of artists. Called an emergency meeting of the consortium board. "I have found something," he said, projecting samples of human horror onto the chamber's display. "Something unprecedented." The board members watched. The representative's temperature fluctuated wildly. The delegate retreated partially into their shell. The vexed counselor's hunting eyes dilated with primal response. "What species created this?" they demanded. "Humans from a planet called Earth." "The fear operates on multiple frequencies," they observed. "I count 7 distinct emotional channels in this single piece. Our best artists manage 3 at most." "That is what makes it unprecedented," said. "These humans do not create fear, they architect it. They understand terror at a fundamental level that we have never achieved." The vexed counselor leaned forward. "Why? What made them this way?" "Their history," explained. "They evolved on a hostile world as both predator and prey. Their planet kills them constantly, through disease, disaster, predation, and each other. They have survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and near-extinction events. Their minds developed to find threats everywhere because threats were everywhere." "That explains survival fear," they said. "It does not explain this." He gestured at the display, where a human film showed a woman slowly realizing that her own reflection had become her enemy. "Their pattern recognition," continued. "It overdeveloped. They see faces in random shapes. They find meaning in coincidence. They sense threats in shadows where no threats exist. Their minds create fear even when reality does not provide it." The board was silent for a long moment. "We need this content," they finally said. "Our audiences would pay anything for this." "I agree," said. "Which is why I am requesting authorization to send a cultural acquisition team to Earth. We need to understand these humans. We need to study how they create such effective fear. And we need to secure exclusive distribution rights before any other network discovers them." The vote was unanimous. 3 cycles later, the research vessel Trembling Curiosity departed for the Sol system. Its mission was to observe humanity covertly, to catalog their horror traditions, and to prepare first contact protocols. Watched the ship leave orbit and felt something he had not felt in centuries. His tendrils quivered with anticipation. His scales shifted through colors he could not control. His heart beat faster than normal. He was afraid, but he was also excited. These humans had done something no other species had managed. They had frightened a being who had spent 300 years surrounded by fear. They had made the galaxy's greatest horror curator feel like a beginner. Whatever secrets humanity held, whatever dark knowledge lived in their storytelling traditions, would discover it. And then he would share that beautiful terror with the rest of the galaxy. He did not yet understand what he was truly dealing with. He saw human fear as a product to acquire, a resource to exploit. He did not consider what it meant that such fear existed, what it revealed about the species that created it. That understanding would come later, and it would change everything. Part 2. The research vessel Trembling Curiosity arrived in the Sol system after a journey of several months. Doctor, the ship's lead, stood at the observation window and studied the small blue planet below. Earth looked peaceful from orbit. White clouds drifted over blue oceans and green landmasses. Nothing about its appearance suggested the dark creativity that lived on its surface. Initial scans complete, her assistant reported. Population approximately 8 billion. Technology level is pre-interstellar, as expected. They have primitive satellites, basic computing systems, and global communication networks. The communication networks interest me most, said. That is where they broadcast their fear content. I want full access to everything they transmit. Over the next 18 months, and her team conducted the most thorough cultural study in consortium history. They intercepted broadcasts, analyzed thousands of hours of content, studied human history, and observed the species in their daily lives. What discovered challenged everything she thought she knew about fear. Human fear was not one emotion, it was an entire spectrum. Began the variations and found they seemed endless. Humans feared death, which was common across species, but they also feared the idea of existing after death in some corrupted form. They feared losing their bodies and losing their minds. They feared being alone and being watched. They feared the unknown, and strangely, they also feared truly knowing certain things. They had invented words for fears that other species could not even conceptualize. Fear of deep water, fear of time passing, kenophobia, fear of empty spaces, fear of being forgotten. Each named fear had hundreds of stories built around it. How is this possible? Asked herself repeatedly as she compiled her research. How does a single species contain so much terror? The answer, she gradually realized, lay in human evolution. Humans had developed on a planet that tried to kill them constantly. Their world was filled with predators, parasites, poisons, and natural disasters. But unlike most prey species, humans did not evolve to run faster or hide better. Instead, their minds evolved to predict danger. Human brains were pattern recognition engines. They found connections everywhere, between events, between objects, between ideas. This made them excellent problem solvers. It also made them excellent at imagining problems that did not exist. A human could look at a shadow and see a predator. They could look at a stranger and see a threat. They could look at an empty room and feel watched. Their minds created fear automatically, constantly, whether danger was real or not. But the humans had done something remarkable with this burden. Instead of being paralyzed by their endless fears, they had learned to use them. They transformed their terrors into stories. They shared their nightmares as entertainment. They made fear a form of communication, a way of understanding each other, a bonding experience. Watched humans gather in dark rooms to watch horror films together. She observed them telling scary stories around fires. She studied their festivals celebrating death and monsters. These were not acts of masochism. They were acts of community. By sharing fear, humans processed it. By giving their terrors names and shapes, they made them manageable. Horror content was not just entertainment for humans. It was therapy. It was survival. This explains the complexity, wrote in her report. Human horror operates on multiple emotional frequencies because human fear itself is multi-layered. Their content reflects the actual structure of their terror. We have been creating simulations of fear. They are expressing fear itself. She began sending samples back to the consortium for test broadcasts. The results exceeded all projections. A colony received a film called Hereditary. Within hours, the colony reported mass psychological episodes. Viewers could not stop thinking about the film. They experienced intrusive thoughts, anxiety attacks, and sleep disturbances. The colony's mental health services were overwhelmed. Yet when officials attempted to ban the content, citizens protested. They wanted more. The government filed formal complaints after the consortium distributed the thing. The film featured a creature that could perfectly imitate other life forms, making it impossible to know if anyone around you was real. For a species whose identity was tied to their physical form, this concept was devastating. 7,000 reported identity dissolution panic, a serious psychological condition in their species. Therapists worked overtime for months. Yet they kept watching. They shared the film with friends. They discussed it endlessly on communication networks. They created art inspired by it. The film had traumatized them and they could not get enough. Ratings across the galaxy exploded. Consortium profits increased by 300%. Species that had never consumed horror content before discovered human fear and became addicted. Demand grew faster than supply. The consortium board was ecstatic. "We have found an infinite resource," the representative declared. "Human fear content is more valuable than any mineral, any technology, any other cultural product." But included a warning in her final report, one that the board largely ignored. "Human fear is beautiful because it is earned," she wrote. "This species has stared into genuine darkness and returned to tell stories about it. Their horror is not simulation. It is processed trauma, generational memory, survival wisdom shaped into narrative form." We must remember that human fear content is not just entertainment. It is a map of what humans have survived. Every monster in their stories represents a real danger they faced. Every nightmare reflects an actual possibility they contemplated. Every horror is, in some way, a history lesson. I recommend caution in how we present humanity to the rest of the galaxy. A species capable of such fear is also capable of other things. Their creativity in imagining darkness suggests equal creativity in all areas. Their resilience in facing terror suggests strength we should not underestimate. The board read her warning and dismissed it. They were focused on content and profits. They saw humans as a resource, not as a species worthy of careful consideration. This was their first mistake. Within 2 years, the consortium made formal first contact with humanity. They presented themselves as entertainment executives interested in cultural exchange. Humans, always eager for proof of extraterrestrial life, welcomed them enthusiastically. The negotiations were surprisingly simple. Humans were happy to share their horror content. In exchange, they wanted access to galactic technology and a seat in interstellar society. The consortium agreed quickly, perhaps too quickly. Human horror creators became celebrities across the galaxy. Writers, directors, and game designers found themselves in demand by species they had never imagined existed. Earth's entertainment industry, once focused on a single planet, now served an audience of trillions. Watched this transformation with growing unease. She had spent 18 months studying humanity. She had seen things the consortium executives had not. She had seen how humans told scary stories to children to prepare them for danger. She had seen how soldiers returned from war with broken minds, haunted by horrors they could not unsee. She had seen how entire generations carried trauma from events they had not personally experienced, passed down through culture and story and dream. Humans did not just create fear, they were shaped by it. Every human alive carried centuries of terror in their minds, fears inherited from ancestors who had survived things that killed others. This was not a weakness. It was a form of strength the galaxy had never encountered. "We are not importing content," wrote in her personal journal. "We are importing a relationship with darkness that no other species possesses. We should be asking not what humans can give us, but what we are inviting into our civilization." No one listened to her concerns. The profits were too good. The content was too popular. The galaxy had fallen in love with human fear. And humans, for their part, were only beginning to understand the power they had been handed. Part 3. A decade passed, and humanity's position in the galaxy transformed completely. They had arrived as a primitive species from an unremarkable planet. Now they were cultural powerhouses, shapers of nightmares, architects of terror for a trillion beings. Human horror creators had become the most sought-after artists in known space. A single human writer could command fees that would fund a small colony. Directors were recruited years in advance. Game designers were treated like royalty. The species that had barely escaped nuclear self-destruction now influenced the dreams of an entire civilization. But something unexpected was happening, something the consortium had not predicted. Other species were beginning to fear humans themselves. It started small, noticed at first in casual conversations. Species that had enthusiastically consumed human horror were now speaking about humanity with careful tones. They watched humans with wary eyes at interstellar gatherings. They hesitated before entering negotiations with human representatives. The fear was not logical. Humans were not particularly violent compared to other species. The Vex had evolved as apex predators and could kill with their bare claws. They had conquered 12 systems through military force. Humans had only just learned interstellar travel. Yet it was humans who made others nervous. Finally understood when she attended a cultural symposium where human and alien artists discussed their creative processes. An artist asked the human panelist a simple question: "Where do your ideas come from?" The human, a horror writer named Sarah, smiled. "Everywhere," she said. "I look at anything in my life and ask, how could this hurt me? How could this go wrong? What is the worst possible version of this situation?" The ideas come naturally after that. The audience was silent, felt the emotional temperature in the room shift. They had asked the question expecting a discussion of technique. Instead, they had glimpsed something about the human mind itself. Humans automatically imagined worst-case scenarios. They looked at safety and saw potential danger. They looked at love and saw potential loss. They looked at existence and saw potential meaninglessness. Their minds generated darkness as a natural function, the way other species generated hope or curiosity or calm. This was what frightened the galaxy. Not human strength or aggression, but human imagination. Any species that could dream up such terrors, parasites that replaced your identity, loved ones who were secretly monsters, universes that cared nothing for your existence, must have confronted these possibilities internally. Human minds contained mapped and darkness. They had names for fears that other species could not even conceive. They had already imagined horrors that had not yet occurred to anyone else. What else could such minds imagine? The government quietly began increasing security around human visitors. They developed psychological screening protocols for citizens who consumed too much human content. The Vex, despite their predator heritage, refused to let humans visit there alone. Trade negotiations with humanity became complex. Other species could not help wondering what humans were really thinking, what dark possibilities they were calculating behind their friendly expressions. Humans smiled often, and other species had learned that human smiles could mean many things. Happiness, yes, but also nervousness, threat, deception, the concealment of pain. A human smile was a mystery, and mysteries had become frightening. The first Galactic Cultural Summit was organized to address these growing tensions. Representatives from every major species gathered on neutral ground. The official agenda discussed content licensing and creative collaboration. The unofficial agenda was simpler. What do we do about the humans? Ambassador Diana represented humanity. She was a small woman with dark hair and calm eyes. Attending as a cultural consultant, noticed that moved through the summit with perfect poise. She greeted nervous aliens warmly. She laughed at jokes. She made everyone feel comfortable. This only made other species more uneasy. How could she not see their fear? Or did she see it and simply not care? Or, worse, did she see it and enjoy it? The summit's final session addressed the matter directly. The delegate spoke first. "Humanity has given the galaxy many gifts," he said carefully. Your horror content has enriched our cultures, but we must discuss certain concerns. Your species imagines darkness that troubles other civilizations. We wonder what this reveals about human nature. Other delegates nodded. The representative added, "We do not suggest that humans are dangerous, but we must ask, what limits exist in the human imagination? Is there any darkness you will not explore?" Ambassador listened to each concern patiently. When the delegates finished, she stood and addressed the assembly. "I understand your questions," she said. "You have consumed our fear for a decade. Now you fear us. This seems contradictory, but I think it makes perfect sense." She paused and noticed something in her expression, a flicker of something old and knowing, the expression of a species that had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and near extinction. "You hired us to frighten you," continued. "You sought our content because it affected you more deeply than anything else. You wanted to feel terror and we delivered. Now you feel terror when you look at us. I would call that a successful audition." The assembly was very quiet. "Let me tell you something about human fear," said. "We are afraid constantly. We fear death and loneliness and meaninglessness. We fear our loved ones and ourselves. We fear the past and the future. We have carried this fear for our entire existence as a species. But we did not let fear destroy us. We transformed it. We made it into stories. We shared it with each other. We turned our greatest weakness into our greatest art. This is what you have imported, not just content but a survival strategy that took humanity thousands of years to develop." She smiled and saw several delegates flinch. "You ask what limits exist in the human imagination. The answer is none. We can imagine anything. We have imagined the end of our species, the death of our universe, the meaninglessness of existence itself. We have stared into every abyss and found ways to keep walking. This frightens you because you realize something important. Any species that can imagine such terrors and continue to function, continue to create, continue to love and hope and build, that species is not weak. That species is strong in ways you have never had to be. We are not monsters. We are survivors. We have faced darkness that would break other species, and we made beauty from it. This is humanity's gift, not just fear, but the transformation of fear into something meaningful." Ambassador looked around the assembly one final time. "You wanted to understand human fear. Now you do. The question is what you will do with that understanding. We can be partners in exploring the darkness together, or we can be something that lurks in your nightmares. The choice is yours." She sat down. The assembly remained silent for a long moment. Then something remarkable happened. The Vex delegate, whose species were legendary predators, rose to his feet and bowed to Ambassador. One by one, other delegates followed, not in submission but in recognition. They had wanted human fear as entertainment. They had received something far more valuable, proof that fear could be survived, proof that darkness could be faced and transformed, proof that the worst horrors imaginable did not have to destroy you. Humanity had not just shared their terror, they had shared their resilience. They had shown the galaxy that being afraid was not the same as being defeated. In the years that followed, the relationship between humanity and the galactic community evolved. Other species still consumed human horror content eagerly, but now they approached it differently. They saw it not just as entertainment but as education, lessons in how to face the darkness within themselves. Humans became teachers as well as artists. They helped other species understand and process their own fears. They showed them how to transform trauma into story, nightmare into narrative, terror into meaning. Finally published her research under a new title, The Fear Teachers: How Humanity Transformed Galactic Psychology. It became the most read text in history. In her conclusion, she wrote, "We thought we were acquiring content. We were actually acquiring wisdom. Humanity's greatest export was never their horror stories. It was their demonstration that horror stories could be told, that darkness could be faced, that fear was not an ending but a beginning. They showed us something we had forgotten or never knew, that the species which understands fear most deeply is not the weakest, but the strongest. For they have walked through the darkness and emerged still capable of creation, still capable of love, still capable of hope. This is humanity's true gift to the galaxy. Not the beautiful complexity of their fear, but the beautiful complexity of their courage. And across the stars, trillions of beings watched human horror content with new eyes, learning with each story that they too could face the darkness. Learning, as humans had always known, that fear was just the first chapter.